Hot Days by Griffin Rose on AO3. Episode 36. Chapter 8. Summer Camp. Part 2. Attack. Breathing deep, he shifted into a pelirac and carefully walked over to Koda. Offering him his back, he made sure to keep his mouth shut. The teeth would probably be a little terrifying right now, and Koda didn't need more fear tonight. You want me to get on? Koda asked. Izuku nodded. Okay. Koda was gentle as he climbed on Izuku's back, only loosely holding his hands around Izuku's neck. It was a stark contrast from the kid who punched him in the balls when they first met. Izuku wished he could tell Koda to hold on tighter, but since he couldn't talk like this, he'll just have to hope instincts would kick in once he'd flight. He'd be careful, anyways. Muscular had made a gap in the tree cacophony where he followed them, and Izuku used that to get up to the sky. The purple gas was still swirling around, and fire was spreading. And as Izuku steered them towards the campgrounds, a glacier creased the tree lines. The remedial lessons were as much a punishment for the teachers as they were for students. Shouta might have been used to late nights and surviving only a few hours of sleep, but Vlad sure wasn't. He did all his hero work on the weekends, with the occasional after-dinner bust, if he was on a case. Still, Vlad was put together and didn't show the exhaustion he must be feeling. Not like the students who looked like they were falling asleep, paying any attention. And he'd get it, okay? He did. He was punishing them brutally, expecting more out of them than even they knew how to give. But he didn't have a choice. Not with the leagues of villains out there. These kids had to be ready. Shouta always thought that he had 3 years to get the kids trained. But after the USJ, it felt more like he was already too late. But damn it all. These kids were going to be the best heroes the world had ever seen if it was the last thing he did. If only because he couldn't stand to see any of them fail. So yes, he demanded everything from them. Physical from dawn to dusk. And then he demanded everything mentally from them once the sun went down. It was harsh. He was demanding, and he was unforgiving. But he never promised to be otherwise. These kids hadn't learned what they needed to during the semester. If they wanted to succeed in their next term, they had to figure it out over the summer. They had barely been at it for an hour when Malday's telepathic cut his lecture. Villains. His heart dropped to his feet, and before he knew it, he ordered Vlad to protect the students and raced out for the door. Izuku was out there, and there was some unknown amount of villains, and that his son. He will not lose his son, not while he was still breathing. He wouldn't lose any of his students, but his first thought was Izuku. If he couldn't save Izuku, he wouldn't be able to save any of them. He'd be too broken. Looks like your concern has distraction. Blue flames filled his vision. Only years of training triggered his reflexes, shooting his capture scarf to get him out of the line of fire. Nice moves. Guess you really are a pro. There was a young man standing just outside the door, half of his face and arms still covered in old leathery scars. Shouta adjusted his grip to something more secure, spontaneously locking away his emotions. He couldn't afford to let his feelings override his logic. The man's hand twitched. Shouta peremptorily activated his quirk, dropping down from the gauge just as the man tried to use another flame attack. Not so fast. He tossed another loop on the scarf around the villain and drew him closer, slamming a knee to his face. The man went down, spinning to land face first in the dirt. Shouta pinned him, twisting his left arm painfully. Tell me where your friends are and what they want. Your right arm is next. My what? He twisted the man's arm more, threatening to snap it. Be logical, or at least seize your legs. It'll be a replane to have to carry you to jail. The man grinned in the dirt. You can take your time, Eraser. Flames danced in the hair. Shouta activated his quirk, just as a loud explosion sounded in the distance. What was that? Please let his students be fighting back, and not getting blown up. He'd never wanted to hear Bakugo's explosions more. Mr. Aizawa! Ida yelled, leading a small group of students through the trees. Stay back! Shouta warned. While he was distracted, the villain managed to slip out from under him. Shouta kept his quirk activated, hands loose and ready with a scarf. He still had a loop binding the villain's arms to his side, but his quirk would give out at some point, and fire was fast. That's exactly the performance I'd expect out of UA's teacher. Tell me, hero, are you worried for your students? I wonder if you could save them in the end. On principle, Shouta tightened a scarf. It tightened on nothing, tearing through the villain's body like a pile of mud. Was this a second quirk? Had he faked the fire somehow? The villain's face twisted in sadistic pleasure before melting, leaving him with one last chilling remark. See you soon. The mud splattered on the ground. Shota's knuckles were white around his scarf, and he dropped his quirk. Ida and the other students ran over to him. Shouta did not like this. He did not like this one bit. He wanted to find every villain in this damn forest and break every bone in their bodies. What was that? Mineta demanded. Did he just melt? What, indeed. Everyone get inside! Shouta yelled, prepared to take off into the forest. He had to find Izuku and the other students. An unholy screech tore to the air. He skittled to a stop in the dirt, his hands back in his capture scarf. What now? Midoriya! Koda yelled, pointing above them. Shota's knees almost gave out from relief. Finally! His son was here, where he could keep him safe. Izuku was okay. A pterodactyl landed in the clearing, stumbling to keep his legs under him and folding his wings up awkwardly. Kota slipped off the back, teary-eyed and shaky, but unharmed. Izuku! Shouta breathed, rushing over. The pterodactyl seemed to take a deep breath before shrinking into his son. His very beat-up, bleeding son. What happened? Shouta demanded, immediately checking for injuries. The villain went after Kota, Izuku said dismissively, as if that wasn't the worrying for a number of reasons. He pushed aside Shota's hands. They're looking for Bakugo. You have to keep him safe. Bakugo? What do the villains want with him? Of course I will. Now come on, you need medical attention. Izuku shook his head. No time. Todoroki is in trouble, and he's all by himself. I have to help. Shouta silently swore. You're not going. He's on the other side of the camp, Izuku yelled back. No one else can get there in time. You're hurt. You know it's dangerous to morph. You can't help anyone if you're dead. I won't sit here when someone needs my help, Izuku said. He had an arm wrapped around his ribs, and he still stepped back into morph into a hawk, ducking under Shota's arm to get airborne. Izuku! Shouta yelled. They never really argued. Izuku was a well-behaved kid for the most part, and if he knew he was in the wrong, he'd always own up to it. In the 7 years Shouta had raised him, he'd never had to so much as ground him. Usually Izuku's guilt was enough punishment for whatever mischief he's gotten into. This was the first spark of rebellion Izuku had ever shown, and Shouta couldn't even be mad at him because if their positions were reversed, he'd do the exact same thing. Well, logically, he couldn't be mad. Emotionally, he was terrified he might have seen his son for the last time, and he was furious Izuku had disobeyed him and pushed himself at risk like that. He could have used Eraser to stop him, but once Izuku was flying, morphing back meant he'll fall and hurt himself even more. Damn it all. Why? Kota whispered, staring up at Izuku, disappearing in the trees. Why did he come find me? He got all beat up trying to protect me, and I've been nothing to mean to him. And now he's rushing off again? That's what heroes do, Ida replied softly. I never apologized for punching him, Kota said, tears building into sobs, or thanked him. Shouta ruffled his hair and pushed him towards Aida. You'll get the chance. I've trained that kid myself. He'll come back. Now get inside. All of you. I need to find Mande. Ida took charge, urging everyone inside, while Shouta ran through the woods. He needed to try and protect the other students, and warned them what the villains were targeting students. More importantly, he needed Mandate to tell the students to use their quirks to defend themselves. He'd taken the heat if it came down to it, but he wasn't going to let these kids get hurt because they weren't willing to break a measly law. His own son was proof these villains had no problem hurting kids. He pushed himself to run faster. Travel was so convenient. Izuku could get almost anywhere about 10 times faster when he flew, and when he wasn't sure exactly where he was going, having a bird's eye view was invaluable. Todoroki's giant glacier was a big help, even if it was worrying. Izuku was still en route when a man flipped through the air, using some kind of stilts or poles or something from his mouth. That was kind of interesting, and on any other day, Izuku would wonder about it. Right now, he just needed to know how to get around it and take the man down. Preferably quickly. Adrenaline drowned out all pain right now, but that wouldn't last. The second he had a chance to stop and calm down, he was going to be in agony. That was a problem for future Izuku. Present Izuku felt no pain and had no issue diving, bombing the guy attacking Todoroki, sharp talons slashing at the guy's head. He almost got skewered by the teeth shooting out of his mouth afterwards, and had to do some fancy flying to avoid them all, ducking around at a glacier and landing next to Todoroki. The kid from 1B was still unconscious on his back, and frost sped around his right side. But he was otherwise unharmed. Izuku let himself breathe and shifted back. Thank goodness you're alright. Not like you. What the hell happened? Todoroki demanded. A villain was going after Koda, but he's safe now. Izuku gingerly pressed his back against the guy's. He felt way too good right now. You shouldn't be here, Todoroki said. I wasn't going to leave you to fend for yourself, Izuku countered. And I'm here now, so deal with it. Todoroki groaned, but ultimately gave in. They didn't have time to debate Izuku fighting or not, anyways. Not when the villain swung himself up and over the glacier and shot spikes of teeth at them. They dodged in opposite directions. Todoroki stomped his foot to shoot another geyser up, but it moved too slowly to trap the villain. Was Todoroki at his limit already? It was entirely possible. Between the days of training and the few glaciers he had already created, he hadn't been at full power when the fighting started. Izuku was pushing his own limits, too. He wasn't sure how many morphs he had left in him before exhaustion trapped him in one form or another. They needed to end this quickly. Well, they still could. He probably shouldn't count on being able to move freely, so he needed to pick his transformation carefully. Should he be a rattlesnake again? And hope he had a chance to bite this guy like he did Muscular? No, this guy stayed in the air too much. He'd never get the chance. Maybe another bird. Something strong like a vulture or a cassowary. No, something smaller and more agile. Like a magpie. A tooth scraped past his cheek, reminding Izuku to get his head back in the fight. He needed to pick something and be quick about it. Midoriya! Todoroki yelled. He dived to avoid another attack and sent a weak ice one back. More frost spread over his arm. You need to use your fire! Izuku yelled. Balance your temperature! I don't want to risk a forest fire. Todoroki yelled. The forest is already on fire, Midoriya told him. He weaved through another attack, ignoring the way the villain demanded they show them their flesh. Then why would I make it worse? A tooth scraped against the frost of his arm, just barely missing skin as the frost peeled away. Because you're giving yourself frostbite, Midoriya yelled. I'm fine, Todoroki yelled. He was not, but Izuku wasn't one to talk right now. They could deal with Todoroki's stubbornness later. Right now, Izuku needed a plan that used the ice, since that's all Todoroki would use. He managed to dart across the path to Todoroki again, only getting one shallow cut on his arm. He was disappointed in himself for that. Usually his reflexes were much better. Alright, if you won't use your fire, then I need you to trap this guy against the ice. Just get him cornered and I'll get in close and take him down. Todoroki nodded, and they split again. Todoroki sprinted further up the path, putting most of the glaciers around behind him. Izuku carefully let another teeth slice his arm, luring the villain to where he'd promise of blood. If Shouta had been mad before, he'd be absolutely furious with this strategy. Izuku resolved to never tell him about it. Hey! Todoroki yelled, catching Moonfish's attention right before creating a half dome of ice around him. Moonfish had nowhere else to go but forward, right where Izuku was. Izuku morphed into a cheetah, the most agile of the big cats he had relied on, and pounced with a mighty roar. Another roar echoed and his teeth flashed in his vision. Something dark wrapped around him, and he barely had time to think, "What the fuck?" before he went flying through the air, crashing through the trees and collapsing in the bushes. The world reduced to nothing but the pain in his chest. Black spots his vision, and he scrambled to the sweet relief of unconsciousness, and blessed nothingness that came with it. Todoroki didn't see what happened, not through the ice he created. He heard Midoriya's roar, and then there was an answering roar as a shadow burst through the trees. Then, half the ice he created shattered, and he heard something shouting as the shadow raced towards him next. He rolled to his side, losing his grip on the kid on his back, coming up in a defensive crouch in front of him. He briefly tried to find Midoriya, or even the villain they had been fighting, but he didn't see them. "Todoroki!" A somewhat familiar voice called. Shoji came out of the trees, one of his hands a bloody stump. The pieces clicked together. Shoji had been paired with Tokoyami, and if Shoji was here, then Tokoyami. No. Dark Shadow. What had Tokoyami said about the darkness? Dark Shadow screeched and turned for Todoroki again. He didn't hesitate to call up his fire this time, keeping it small and encased around his hand. Dark Shadow pulled back from his flaming punch, retreating into a panicking Tokoyami. Shoji hurried over. "Tokoyami, are you alright?" "Yes. I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused." "Don't be," Todoroki said, looking once again for Moonfish and Midoriya. He warmed up his left side to finally counteract, overusing his right. "He probably saved us from that villain. I'm not sure Midoriya could have taken him down as fast as you did." His classmates glanced at each other. "Midoriya is here?" Shoji asked. Todoroki did not like the way he asked that. "Yes. Didn't you see him when Dark Shadow took over the villain?" Tokoyami shook his head. "I couldn't see much of anything while Dark Shadow was in control." Dread quickly pulled in Todoroki's stomach. His mouth was dry. "But he was right there." "Oh no," Tokoyami said. "What have I done?" "It wasn't your fault," Shoji insisted. The fear in Todoroki begged to differ, but when he had a chance to calm down and think rationally, he knew he wouldn't blame his classmates. "We have to find him. He was hurt." He was hurt, and Todoroki let him fight anyways. He should have frozen Midoriya solid the way he did Zero during the sports festival. "How badly?" Shoji asked. "Not sure. Broken ribs, maybe, and a few cuts. I don't know how deep." They hadn't seemed to slow Midoriya down, and if broken ribs hadn't, what were a few slashes going to? "Then we better hurry," Shoji said. He created extra ears on the end of his dual arms, and they all split to search the woods. They didn't find Midoriya. They found Uraraka and Tsuyu being attacked by another villain and chasing the girl off. Somehow, in the process, they also lost Tokoyami. A villain in a top hat dragged about capturing him, and Tokoyami being a good console prize if they couldn't get Bakugo. They had to chase him to get Tokoyami back, even if they ultimately failed to catch up with him. By then, they completely lost track of where they'd last seen Midoriya. Considering how the search for him had gone before, Todoroki thought it more likely the marble guy had taken him. Clearly these villains were here for students, and Midoriya made as much sense as Bakugo or Tokoyami. As terrible as Todoroki felt, there was nothing compared to that feeling that sank in his chest when Aizawa finally found him and made a beeline for him. Shouta was quick to get Mandate and help find the two villains there, and then he made her broadcast his permission to all the students in the forest that they were allowed to engage in combat. He warned her, that the villains were after the students, but he didn't have her broadcast that to them. They didn't need to make the kids panic. Besides, they only confirmed the student that they were after was Bakugo, and he was already safe with Vlad. Safe in a building that had already been targeted by one villain, who would probably try again now that Eraser wasn't there. Shit. He ran back as fast as he could, not surprised to find the building on fire. Disappointment and furious, but not surprised. By the time he made it inside, the same villain he'd fought before had already melted, and the students had already put out the fire like pros. They were aiming to be. Good to know they weren't all completely useless. He'll be proud later, when the danger was over and he'd let himself feel emotions again. The villain made one more attempt, but between Shouta and Vlad, he didn't even make it through the door. There wasn't a fourth attempt. The students started coming back in groups, some of them crying their unconscious classmates. 2 from the 1B reported taking down a gas-controlling villain, which explained the unconscious students and some of the gas masks. Shouta hadn't even known about the poisonous gas, and he hated that. He hated that they'd been fighting for their lives, and there'd been nothing he could do. He was their teacher. He was supposed to protect them. But they had to protect themselves. Most students, thankfully, were uninjured. Dozens were unconscious, and emergency services were already on the way. Yarozu came back with a bleeding head wound, and now Yaza babbled on some monster they'd been fighting, its brain exposed, and Shouta wanted to puke. There'd been a Nomu here, and his students had faced off against it, and seemingly only survived because it gave up and walked off when it had them cornered. He was definitely going to be sick. They were just kids, for God's sake. Tiger and Mande ran a perimeter check, rounding up a few more students and taking notes of the few defeated villains they could find. They brought back a shaggy Oyami, who reported watching the villains go through a warp gate, the same one from the USJ. They did not achieve their true objective, but they had something else. He said, I did not want to see what it was. For a minute, Shouta was able to relax. Oyama called it a what, which meant his students were safe. The last group Tiger and Mande brought back, Todoroki, Araka, Tsuyu, and Soji, had the worst looks on their faces compared to anyone. Shouta looked at Todoroki, and his heart seized. Izuku had gone to help Todoroki. Todoroki was here, but Izuku wasn't. He charged Todoroki. Where's Izuku? He demanded, worry making his tone sharp and accusatory. We don't know. Todoroki whispered. He couldn't look up when he spoke. We were fighting, but then Dark Shadow came and I don't know what happened. Midoriya's just gone. So is Tokoyami. The what Oyama had been talking about had been a villain's quirk, turning one of his students into a marble. They had confirmed that Tokoyami was kidnapped, and could only assume the same of Izuku. Tiger had to physically drag Shouta away before the shock wore off, and he did something he'd regret. He took Shouta around the side of the building, and Shouta finally let himself break, throwing up everything he had eaten all day and choking on sobs. Tiger rubbed his back. Your boy is tough as they come. He'll be alright. We'll find them. Oh, Shouta was going to find him alright. And when he got his hands on the villain who took his students, they were gonna wish they'd never messed with UA. What the fuck? Next chapter is called Kimi no. The notes is, let's write a cute fluffy one-shot. 90k words and 9 chapters later. Pass me, you're hilarious. Fuck you, Griffin Rose! Did they actually... Pass the bottle. I need to start drinking. Okay. I don't have anything to say. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Thank you so much for watching.